The story of the children who never returned from Bramble Creek begins in a quiet, forgotten town nestled on the edge of an ancient forest. The townsfolk go about their lives with a hushed wariness, their eyes always flickering toward the looming trees as if expecting something to emerge. Parents warn their children not to play near Bramble Creek, not to wander too far into the woods, and certainly not to linger after dusk. But the warnings are always vague, spoken in half whispers, as if saying too much might summon the very thing they fear. Generations have passed since the first disappearances, but the memory lingers like a stain. Every few years, a child, sometimes two, ventures into Bramble Creek and never comes back. No bodies are ever found. No frantic searches yield answers. The forest swallows them whole, leaving behind only whispers and a deepening dread. Some say the trees themselves are alive, shifting paths to trap the lost. Others claim to have heard laughter echoing from the undergrowth, laughter that sounds almost like children, but not quite. The older residents speak of a tragedy long buried, a sin committed by the town's founders. A wrong so terrible that the land itself took vengeance, cursing Bramble Creek to hunger for the young. But no one dares speak the full story aloud. The missing children's names are etched into memorial stones at the forest's edge, yet even those stones seem to sink deeper into the earth with each passing year, as if the ground is trying to erase them. And so, the town lives in quiet tension, caught between denial and fear. The children, of course, hear the rumors. They trade stories in schoolyards, daring each other to step just beyond the tree line. Most resist, but some, the reckless, the curious, the ones who don't believe in ghosts, always take that first step. And Bramble Creek is always waiting. The town of Black Hollow had always been a place of uneasy silences. Nestled between the mist-laced mountains and the creeping shadow of Bramble Creek Forest, it was the kind of town that seemed to exhale sorrow when the wind blew just right. The adults spoke in low tones over steaming coffee at the diner, their eyes darting toward the woods whenever the conversation lulled. The children, sensing the unspoken rule, knew better than to ask too many questions, but they heard things. Whispers at sleepovers, warnings muttered by grandparents, the way their parents' hands tightened around theirs if they strayed too close to the tree line at dusk. Bramble Creek had always been there, older than the town itself. Its trees grew twisted, their gnarled branches knitting together like skeletal fingers, sealing away whatever lurked inside. The creek that gave the forest its name ran black in certain patches, as if the water itself had been stained by something far beneath the earth. Locals swore that if you stood too close to its banks at night, you could hear it. Not the babbling of water over rocks, but something softer. A child's voice humming a half-remembered lullaby. The disappearances started long before anyone kept proper records. Old Miss Dillard, the town's ancient librarian, would sometimes let slip fragments of the past when the mood struck her. Tales of settlers' children wandering into the woods in the 1800s, never to be seen again. Of search parties that returned hollow-eyed and stammering about things moving just beyond their lantern light. The town's one attempt to cut down the forest's outer trees in the 1920s ended in disaster when two loggers vanished overnight, their axes found embedded in the same oak, as if they'd simply melted into the bark. By the time modern decades rolled in, the rules were set in stone. Don't go into Bramble Creek. Don't answer if you hear your name called from the trees. And never, ever follow the lights. Because sometimes, usually in the thick of autumn, when the air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves, people reported seeing them, faint flickering orbs drifting between the trunks like lost lanterns. Old-timers called them witch lights, said they were the spirits of the taken children, still wandering, still hungry for playmates. Skeptics dismissed it as swamp gas or foxfire. But every few years, another kid would test the theory. A dare, a bet, a moment of reckless bravery, and then the inevitable. The empty backpack found at the forest's edge, the sneaker half sunk in mud, the parents' screams echoing through the town like a death knell. The memorial near the town square told the official story, a slab of granite etched with names, dates, and the words, "Gone but not forgotten." But the real truth was carved into the town itself, in the way mothers pulled their curtains shut when the fog rolled in, the way dogs howled at the tree line but refused to set paw beyond it, the way even the bravest hunters wouldn't track wounded deer into those woods. Black Hollow knew Bramble Creek was alive, and it knew the forest was always, always watching. The air tasted like damp earth and impending rain when Jake Morrison shoved his hands into his pockets and smirked at the group. "You're all just scared," he said, his voice dripping with the kind of confidence that only a 13-year-old with something to prove could muster. "It's just a stupid forest." The others shifted uneasily. Behind them, the setting sun painted Bramble Creek in long, skeletal shadows, trees stretching their gnarled fingers across the ground like something waking up. The forest had always been there, looming at the edge of Black Hollow, like a bad thought no one wanted to say out loud. "You know what happened to the Grady twins?" Emily muttered, her arms crossed tight over her chest. She was the only one who ever really paid attention to the warnings, the only one who noticed how the grown-ups' voices dropped to whispers when Bramble Creek was mentioned. Jake rolled his eyes. "That was like 50 years ago? You really believe that ghost story?" "It wasn't just them," Tyler cut in, uncharacteristically serious. His older brother had been part of the search party last summer when Lily Carmichael disappeared. They'd found her bike near the creek, its front wheel still spinning lazily, like she'd just stepped away. But she never had. A beat of silence. Then Jake grinned, slow and daring. "Bet none of you have the guts to go in right now." The challenge hung in the air, thick as the humidity clinging to their skin. No one wanted to back down, not in front of the others. Tyler swallowed hard. "Fine. But just to the big oak and back. That's it." Tyler swallowed hard. "Fine. But just to the big oak and back. That's it." The others exchanged glances, then nodded. It was just a stupid dare. Just a few steps into the trees. What could happen in 5 minutes? They crossed the threshold like trespassers, the temperature dropping the moment they passed under the canopy. The forest didn't feel like the woods behind Tyler's house, where sunlight dappled the ferns and birds chirped lazily overhead. Here, the silence was suffocating. No birds, no wind, just the occasional creak of branches, like the trees were shifting to watch them pass. Jake led the way, his earlier bravado fading with every step. The deeper they went, the more the path seemed to twist in on itself, the trees pressing closer. The big oak, the one they'd all climbed 100 times from the other side, was nowhere to be found. "Okay, this is dumb," Emily whispered, her voice too loud in the quiet. "We should go back." But when they turned around, the path behind them was gone. And then, from somewhere deep in the trees, something giggled. The giggle hung in the air like a spider's thread, thin, trembling, and wrong. All 4 of them froze. It hadn't come from any of them. Emily was the first to speak, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Did you—" Another giggle cut her off, closer this time. It didn't sound like a child's laughter, not really. It was too high, too sharp, like something trying to mimic what it thought joy should sound like. Jake spun in a slow circle, his bravado from earlier crumbling. "Okay, joke's over," he called out. But his voice cracked. The trees swallowed his words whole. Tyler grabbed Emily's wrist. "We need to go. Now." They turned back the way they'd come, but the path they'd followed just minutes ago was gone. In its place stood a wall of thorny undergrowth, so thick it looked like it had been growing there for years. "That's impossible," Jake breathed. A rustling sound came from the bushes to their left. Small, quick movements, like something darting just out of sight. "Guys!" Mia's voice made them all jump. She was the quiet one, the one who'd barely said a word since they'd entered the woods. Now she stood a few paces behind them, staring into the trees with wide, glassy eyes. "Mia, come on," Tyler urged, reaching for her. But Mia didn't move. "Do you see it?" she whispered. They followed her gaze. Deep in the shadows between the trees, something pale flickered. A shape. Small. A child. Then it moved. Not like a child. Too fast. Too fluid. A deer, maybe, but deer didn't stand on two legs. Emily's breath hitched. "We need to run." They bolted, crashing through branches that seemed to reach for them, snagging their clothes, their hair. Behind them, the giggling started again, bouncing between the trees like it was coming from everywhere at once. Tyler risked a glance back. Mia was gone. Just gone. No scream, no sound. 1 second she'd been right behind them, and the next, the forest had swallowed her whole. They skidded to a stop, chests heaving. "Mia?" Jake's voice was raw. No answer. Just the whisper of leaves and that terrible, creeping sense that they were no longer alone. And then, from somewhere above them, something rustled the branches. Slowly, they looked up. The branches above them trembled, though there was no wind. At first, Tyler thought it was an animal, a raccoon maybe, or an owl stirring in the daylight where no owl should be. Then the leaves parted, and he saw it. $1. Not a toy, not something plastic and bright from a store shelf, but a crude thing, its body stitched together from burlap and rotting cloth. One button eye was missing, the other stared down at them, unblinking. Its mouth was a stitched gash, pulled into a smile too wide for its face. It shouldn't have been terrifying, but it was, because it was moving. Its head tilted, slow and deliberate, the way a predator sizes up prey. Then, from somewhere deep in the trees, a voice whispered, "You're it." They ran. Branches lashed at their arms, roots snaked up to trip them, but they didn't stop. Not until they burst into a clearing, and there, hunched like a sleeping beast, was the shack. It shouldn't have been there. No one had ever mentioned a shack in Bramble Creek, but there it stood, its wood warped and blackened with age, the roof sagging under the weight of decades of neglect. The door hung open, just a crack, just enough to invite them in. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and something sweetly rotten. The walls were covered in names, hundreds of them carved into the wood, scratched into the floorboards. Some were fresh, the cuts still pale against the dark wood. Others were so old they'd nearly faded away. Emily's breath hitched. "Are these all of them?" Jake finished, his voice hollow. "The missing, the taken, the ones who never came back." In the center of the room sat a table, and on it, a book. Its pages were yellowed, its spine cracked with age. Tyler didn't want to touch it, but he did. The first page held a single sentence, written in a shaky hand. "It keeps them because it's lonely." Then, from outside, the giggling started again. Closer this time. The moment they saw the first shadow move against the trees, they knew they'd made a terrible mistake. Branches cracked like gunshots in the unnatural silence as Tyler, Emily, and Jake crashed through the undergrowth, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest had changed around them. The familiar oaks and maples now twisted into grotesque shapes, their trunks bent at impossible angles as if straining to grab them as they passed. Emily risked a glance over her shoulder and immediately wished she hadn't. The thing that had been following them moved all wrong, its limbs jerking like a broken puppet's, its body contorting in ways that made her stomach lurch. It wasn't running after them so much as unfolding through the trees, always just a few feet. The forest inhaled around them. That was the thought that struck Tyler as they ran, that the woods weren't just alive, but breathing. The spaces between the trees seemed to contract and expand like lungs, the air growing thick with the scent of wet earth and something older, something that smelled like the inside of a long-sealed tomb. Emily's sneaker sank into the ground with a sickening squelch. She looked down to see the forest floor had turned black and spongy, the mulch pulsing faintly beneath her feet, as if something massive moved just beneath the surface. When she yanked her foot free, it came up dripping with a dark, syrupy fluid that clung to her laces like melted tar. "Keep moving," Tyler gasped, but his voice sounded muffled, as if the trees were drinking the sound. Behind them, the thing that had been Jake made a wet clicking noise. They shouldn't have looked. Every horror movie, every campfire warning screamed at them not to look. But the human mind is a fragile thing, and when faced with the impossible, it demands proof. Emily turned. Jake stood 10 paces behind them, his body angled all wrong, his left knee bent backward, his arms dangling at unnatural angles like a marionette with cut strings. His face, oh God, his face was still Jake's face, but his smile stretched too wide, the corners of his mouth splitting like overripe fruit. Dark veins branched beneath his skin, pulsing in time with the forest's hidden rhythm. "Come play," Not Jake gurgled, and when he opened his mouth too wide, they saw the movement inside, the squirming mass of roots and blackened leaves where his tongue should be. The forest erupted around them. From every rotting log, every shadowed hollow, pale figures uncurled like spiders from a disturbed nest. Some still wore fragments of clothing, a faded baseball jersey here, the tattered remains of a party dress there. Their faces were in various states of decay, some still almost human, others little more than stretched skin over twitching branches. The Grady twins stood at the front of the pack, their matching overalls hanging in mossy tatters, their hollow eye sockets crawling with fat white grubs. Between them stood little Lily Carmichael, her pigtails still tied with pink ribbons, though the rest of her had turned the color of spoiled milk. Not the crisp chill of autumn air, but the deep, marrow-numbing cold of the earth itself reaching up to claim her. She had run until her lungs burned like they'd been filled with ground glass, until the screams behind her, Tyler's screams, had been swallowed by the endless hunger of Bramble Creek. Then the roots had come, snaking up from the black soil like skeletal fingers, wrapping around her ankles with terrifying gentleness before yanking her down into the waiting dark. Real sunlight, not the sickly greenish glow that filtered through Bramble Creek's canopy. She was lying at the edge of the forest, her clothes torn and caked with mud that smelled faintly of rotting leaves. Her hands were scraped raw, her nails split and packed with dirt as if she'd been clawing her way through solid earth. The town found her like that, a shivering, hollow-eyed thing that couldn't, or wouldn't, speak. Sheriff Hayes carried her back to Black Hollow wrapped in his coat, her body so light in his arms, it was like holding a bundle of sticks. The doctors said there was nothing physically wrong with her. The therapists whispered about trauma and dissociative episodes. The townsfolk knew better. She could feel it in the way the shadows in her bedroom twitched when she wasn't looking directly at them. in the faint impressions of small, muddy footprints that appeared on her floor each morning, no matter how often her mother cleaned. Sometimes in the dead hours between midnight and dawn, she'd wake to the sound of giggling just outside her window, a sound that echoed with the damp, earthy acoustics of a forest that shouldn't be able to reach her here. The memorial service for Tyler and Jake was held on a bright October day. Emily stood motionless between their coffins, her hands clasped around a pair of objects she refused to show anyone, things she'd found in her pockets when she woke at the forest's edge. A plastic army man, Jake's, carried since 3rd grade, and a silver guitar pick, Tyler's, a birthday gift from his dad. Both items were caked in the same black mud that had been under her nails. As the priest spoke about closure and God's plan, Emily stared past him to where the trees of Bramble Creek swayed in the distance. The wind carried a whisper no one else seemed to hear, a chorus of young voices murmuring a single phrase over and over, "You're still it." That night, Emily's mother would find her daughter's bed empty, the window open. The only clue left behind would be a single footprint in the dew-damp grass, a child's bare foot, facing toward the woods. And deep in Bramble Creek, if you listened very closely on the right autumn night, you might hear a new voice joining the others in their endless game. The years passed in Black Hollow like a slow fever dream. The town never healed, not truly. The memorial for the lost children grew crowded with fresh names, their letters carved deeper into the stone with each passing autumn. Parents began locking their doors long before sundown, though everyone knew locks wouldn't stop what called to their children when the wind blew from the east, carrying the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. Newcomers to town noticed the strangeness immediately, how the schoolyard fell silent whenever Bramble Creek was mentioned, how the local children drew the same twisted trees in their notebooks over and over, their crayons pressing hard enough to tear the paper, how the old Miller place on Cedar Street stood empty for decades. After that night, the entire family packed up and left between dusk and dawn, their dinner still rotting on the table. Teenagers dared each other to visit the forest's edge at night, though none ventured past the first few trees anymore. Sometimes they came back with stories of shadows that moved against the wind, of whispers that sounded like their names. Most returned quiet and hollow-eyed, their phones filled with blurred photos that showed nothing but darkness, though they swore something had been looking back when they took the shot. The worst was the singing. On certain nights, when the moon hung low and orange over Bramble Creek, the townsfolk would hear it, a chorus of children's voices drifting through the trees. No one could ever agree on the words, though old Miss Dillard at the library would cross herself whenever someone mentioned it. She was the only one still living who remembered the original song, the one the Grady twins had been singing when they disappeared in '58. The town tried everything over the years. A fence was erected around the forest, though by morning the posts stood twisted and broken, their metal warped like taffy. The church held a blessing, but the holy water burned black where it touched the soil. Scientists came with their instruments and left muttering about unexplained magnetic anomalies. Nothing worked, because Bramble Creek was hungry again. On the outskirts of town, where the street lights flickered and died, a new group of children stood at the tree line. They'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. But stories weren't real, not like the dare burning in their chests, not like the voice calling from just inside the shadows, a voice that sounded almost like Emily, if you didn't listen too closely. And deep in the heart of the forest, where the trees grew thick and the sunlight never touched the ground, something stirred. It was almost time to play again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.